Today I want to talk about adventures and specifically how they worked with P.O.F, what we thought of them, whether they were good, whether they were that bad. Now I know a lot of you don't really consider adventures to be big parts of expansion content. A lot of you don't like them. A lot of you were soured by them with Heart of Thorns and how Heart of Thorns delivered them. But I think P.O.F did some interesting things for the feature. Now, I'll remind you all, before the expansion itself came out, many of us were questioning whether they were even going to be a part of it. And if adventures weren't a part of Path of Fire, I would have taken that as a pretty bad sign. Remember, H.O.T was all about implementing systems that would continue to be used by Guild Wars 2 going forwards. Adventures was one of those systems. Whether it was used a ton or not, it was one. And the idea that they would introduce it in H.O.T and then remove it again later could have looked bad, considering the climate we were in at the time they were dropped, and the idea that ArenaNet just keep going half-assed with features and not pushing them all the way. So I was very happy to see adventures come into P.O.F. Let that be clear. But that doesn't mean that they were handled entirely perfectly, and so let's talk about it. If you guys don't know anything, really, first of all, there is a selection of adventures you can do in the expansion that are just like core Path of Fire adventures on each of the maps. So I believe there's like, what was it, one or maybe two on each map. So in the Crystal Oasis, for example, there's one over here at the Amnoon Farms. There's one in the second map. As we progress, there's one here in the Ellen Riverlands, which you can see I'm stood at here actually at the moment, and I'll show you guys a little bit of very soon. As we progress further on, there are more. The difference, though, with the Path of Fire adventures to the H.O.T ones is they're all the same thing. They're called supply runs, all right? Now, supply runs I actually really quite enjoy. This NPC here says to us, we can't continue to feed and provide for our skimmers without supplies from the outside. Can you retrieve them? And we say, well, where are they? They say, we've sent ranch hands out to gather everything we need across the region. They're expecting us to send someone to pick up what they've collected, and will you help? So the idea is, across the maps, there are various NPCs that you can pick supplies up from, and you need to visit all of them as fast as possible. Remember, it's a timed challenge, like Adventures in Heart of Thorns were. And then once you've got all of the supplies, you need to return to where you started from again. So that's the format. It's incredibly simple and basic. Many of you guys may remember playing through Path of Fire, not doing the adventures themselves, but coming across a lot of those NPCs who give you a vague suggestion as to what they're out there for. Well, it's because they're associated with this content. And as basic as supply runs are, and as obviously easy to implement as they are, just dot a couple of NPCs around, stick a timer on it, and go for it. I actually do really like the format, and I like it, in fact, a lot more than many of the Heart of Thorns adventures, even though this is kind of the same thing across all of Path of Fire. I like the format because it's got a lot of potential routing possibilities, and it's more about that necessarily than moment-to-moment dexterity. So when we look at a race-style thing or a time-style thing from Heart of Thorns, say the Leyline Spark Run in Tangled Depths, you know, these adventures are a very well-defined single route, and there are some slight variations you can take and skips you can do, but you know, it's A to B. With the Path of Fire ones, if I'm stood here on this little pyramid, I can decide maybe if I want to go for an NPC over here, I can go for an NPC over here first, I can pick this one first, this one first. Actually deciding where I go first and then which direction I go around to the various NPCs can have a very dramatic effect on my success. And I like that. I've always liked that, you know, when I watch speedrunning live streams and so on, that's always the more interesting part of things for me, sort of that top level routing idea. And then once you've picked your route and identified what you think the fastest one is, then it becomes a matter of dexterity to refine it, and sort of both get to have a good look in instead of just one or the other. So the other thing I quite like about this format is it's clearly playing with mounts, right? These might not feel like they're over that big areas because the Path of Fire maps themselves are so huge, but these are massive environments that we have to travel across, and it's kind of a celebration of that extra movement speed and extra movement capabilities you get on the new creatures in the new expansion. So that's cool, and also because of the way that the mastery system and mount acquisition works as well, at least for your first time playing through Path of Fire, if you make a mental note to do the adventures right when you first see them, you do kind of get that very fun experience of being limited because, oh, I've only got the Raptor, coming back later and realizing there's so much more is possible now because the Skimmer's there, the Springer, sorry, is there, and it lets you jump over this, or especially the Griffin. When you get the Griffin and you come back to all these adventures, totally changes stuff. So again, the reason I'm at the Skimmer Ranch is because this is one of the hardest ones that I found. In fact, probably the hardest adventure in all of Path of Fire is right here. You're looking at it. Now, I might decide before I have the Griffin, and indeed I streamed this, I might decide before I have the Griffin to run along to, say, this flag over here. Sorry, I may decide to come over to this flag here first, this supplies first. But once I've got the Griffin, maybe a different one looks better. Maybe this one here at the high ground looks better so that I can equip the Griffin from here and glide across very fast, right? So all of a sudden the way that verticality plays with all of these changes a lot just because you've got the later mounts. And I like that. And I think that that's actually what adventures were always supposed to be quite good at doing. So yeah, that's another dimension. Again, I like the formats, and I think it's probably good on ArenaNet's end as well because they can just dump them in so quickly. A final note as well is this is a pretty fun format when it comes to playing with lots of people, especially if you get an entire Zerg and they all spread out all over the map and you see everyone charging around. That's a lot of fun. And no, you don't need to be some big streamer or whatever to be able to get that. Obviously, when they do a daily associated with an adventure, you can get that experience. And that happened very rarely with Heart of Thorns, I think. One of the best ones for Heart of Thorns was the Char car race for a similar kind of experience. But H.O.T did a lot of adventures where they throw people off into instances. And using instances has its advantages, but I always prefer when stuff is in the open world. And guess what? All of the Path of Fire adventures, all of them are open world adventures. And that's nice. Another advantage from that as well is many people have criticized Path of Fire for not having any really massive meta events that, you know, everyone feels tunnel vision to do and you get the entire map going for. Well, I think a lot of that instancing and weird stuff that was going on with Heart of Thorns kind of tied to how they balanced that with the metas themselves. If you remember when Heart of Thorns came out, they disabled adventures while metas were going on in an attempt to make sure that at any one time, all the players on a certain map had the same goal, either doing the meta or then when the meta wasn't active, you were free to go do the adventures. People didn't like that though, because locking the adventures off when you wanted to do it, especially if it meant getting a mastery point or whatever, was frustrating. And so you'll notice that in Path of Fire, all of the adventures are in the open world, none of them get disabled at any time. And those were two big things that H.O.T was wrestling with, but this format has fixed. And I think it generally has gone underappreciated by the P.O.F community. The last really to mention is Vabi, where there's lots of these supply runs. I think there's like 3 or maybe even 4. And instead of them being really massive things over entire maps, they're kind of in smaller chunks. And so these are actually really fun and some of the best I think that they do. At the end of the expansion, you get the more interesting ones. So like the Garden of Saborin one that you can see in the background right now. This is beautiful. I love this little adventure, and especially watching videos online of people finishing it really fast, like minutes faster than I could, is fascinating to see. And a perfect example of what I'm talking about with routing and so forth. There's just one more question then when it comes to the P.O.F adventures, and that's this. Yes, we can accept that the supply runs are pretty good, maybe lacking a bit of flavor, but was it okay for P.O.F to only do supply runs? And now I'm not so sure. Like, let's be honest. Let's look back at Heart of Thorns. We had stuff like the Rumble Pit, where you're running around pressing F on all those little Morgem tendrils and, you're collecting supply as the tendrils try to beat you up. You've got stuff like the Flying Circus, which is kind of an early version of some of the P.O.F adventures. You've got the archery shootout. You've got that ley line run I talked about, the char car races. You've got the instance ones where you completely change your gear and stuff, so you're running around with a flamethrower or in a giant golem. You had action cam being used. I really think that the Heart of Thorns ones, though there was a bit of RNG on some of them, and by the way, that's another thing that the P.O.F format has sort of got away from. There's not so much RNG on these anymore. There is with enemy spawns and stuff. Though there was a bit of RNG on them, I think I preferred the way Heart of Thorns did it, where all the adventures were really different and weird and cool. And that could be taxing. Another thing I remember from Heart of Thorns was playing through and kind of being uninterested in doing an adventure constantly, because I'd have to learn a new format every time. Learn another adventure, and then learn another adventure, and then learn another, like it was a big ordeal each time. While with P.O.F, they kind of get around that because they're all the same format. Once I've learned what the first supply run's like in the Crystal Oasis, it's pretty free and comfortable and easy for me to do it in the next map, and then the next map, and the next map, because it's not like I have to learn a new rule set every time. So I wonder where the balance is for you guys. I'm not sure. I think I would have liked a bit more variety than just these for P.O.F. So one final thing to talk about with the P.O.F adventures is something I've touched on the channel before, so I'm not going to go on about it too long here, but it's the idea of replayability and how we are actually incentivized to do them. And again, here I'm not sure either on this format. So, rewinding the clock to Heart of Thorns, those adventures had mastery points tied to them, And one of the easiest, most reliable ways to get mastery points was to do their adventures. Beyond that as well, right at the launch of Heart of Thorns, a lot of story was gated behind mastery progression, which meant that you were incredibly heavily incentivized to go and do those adventures. You weren't required to, as far as I remember. You could do other stuff to get mastery points, but generally speaking, there was a lot of very good, solid reason to go to them, which meant that a lot of people had to go try them out. And on top of that, the devs also made them quite hard. Getting silver, getting gold, for a lot of them was really challenging. And even after nerfs, today, here in 2017, a lot of the Heart of Thorns ones are still challenging. The combination of those two things gave the H.O.T. Adventures, no matter what the adventures themselves were actually like, gave them a bad rap, which was unfortunate, but it was clear that a lot of people weren't interested in that style of gameplay where you grind on something again and again and again to get better and better and better and better and better until finally you get gold. People didn't like that. They didn't like feeling like they were forced into that either. I would argue they weren't, but they didn't like feeling forced because there was mastery points associated with that. So to fix this, for Path of Fire, all ArenaNet really needed to do was one or the other. Remove the mastery points or make it easy to get silver and gold. I'm quite sad that P.O.F did both. And the result has been that people, and when I say people, I include myself here, generally have done one of the adventures once, got gold the first time they've completed it because they're so easy, and got the achievement for it and never returned. And I think that's really, really, really sad. The rewards are just not good enough in Path of Fire to come back to these. They are fire and forget content. You run through them. I would actually say that these have less replay value than even the story does, which doesn't have much in itself, but at least you can get 3 playthroughs from if you like. And I think that that's really unfortunate because adventures are all about repeating lots. So how do you guys feel about that? Is that okay because adventures were always supposed to just be for a tiny niche of the community? And maybe because they're using just this one format, it's all right? And I don't know, I don't like that double dipping, and I think it's really, really unfortunate that the only adventure in all of P.O.F that I really genuinely had to do a few times and think carefully about was this one right here on the 3rd map. All the rest of them, I just kind of winged it, and after 1 or 2 goes, for most of them, maybe 3 or 4 tops, I had the golds on them. So there you go, that's the rundown on the core P.O.F adventures, the regular ones. Found myself enjoying them. I think the format's really smart. I think there's some sides to the format people haven't appreciated that are very smart, but I do think we deserved a bit more variety, and I think there needs to be more reason to replay this stuff, because I want an excuse to come back to them. So that's the core stuff. However, there is another thing to talk about, and this is kind of one of the big reasons I wanted to do this video, and that's the Griffin adventures. So, I've done a few videos very recently talking about acquiring the Griffin, talking about the lore behind the Griffin, talking about the handling of the Griffin. Well, one thing you get as you max out the masteries on your Griffin is you unlock even more adventures in all of Path of Fire. Now, if you guys watched my AMA summary video very recently, the developers actually pointed out in that they wanted to do tons of them, but kind of reined back. The Griffin adventures are amazing, and if you guys haven't tried these or played these, please do give them a shot. So, for the regular adventures, it's the supply run format. Once you get the Griffin, there's an entirely new format. So, there's technically actually 2 types of adventures. And every P.O.F map has at least 2. There are 2 Griffin adventures in the Crystal Oasis. There are 2 in the Desert Highlands. There are 2 in Ellen Riverlands, in the Desolation. And I think there's actually... Was it 2 in the Domain of Abbey as well? So, you need to climb to various high hidden locations, and you'll find the adventure banners. If you ride a Griffin next to them, and only on the Griffin... do you get this? So this is kind of special. The other supply runs, you could use any mount on them. This one will only trigger when you have the Griffin. You notice I've already done this one here today. I'm 6th best today. When I started recording this video, I was actually 5th best today. This is a sign of how little people play this stuff. I've never been so high on a daily leaderboard for an adventure for Heart of Thorns, and yet I just winged it today, and oh, guess what? I'm 6th top, apparently. And this is from one run, one event. I did 1 attempt at this, I got gold, and I got 6th best in the day. That's a great sign of how little people are playing these, right? Which is funny that we actually get that transparency through the leaderboards. So, the idea is, first of all, you need to be on your mount, the Griffin. And then beyond that, there's a couple of other rules as well. So if I launch this now, hold on, let's unmount. Let's start it. If I launch it, there's kind of a thing where if you touch the ground at any point in these adventures, like if we land, it cancels the adventure. So that's another thing, and then we hit reset to go back up to the top. So those are 2 things that are very different about the supply runs. Beyond that, While the supply runs encourage you to go to various NPCs and then return to your starting position, the Griffin ones don't. They're basically just like Superman 64 flying races, where you have to fly through certain rings and checkpoints and get from A to B. A lot like, say, the Char Car race in Heart of Thorns. And I'll show you guys what this looks like. So we come to this orb. And then there's an orb below us. You'll notice that I get a beam connecting me to the orb. And this shows me where it's going to be. So I'm going to dive to get to this one. And now there's an orb up here. So I'm going to rise to get to this one. And then we want to come down. And the speed at which you can go through I'm not using the Griffin boost right now, as you guys know, right? So I'm not even going that fast. I'm taking it pretty easy, pretty comfortably. But this is really awesome. I did many streams playing these. Many streams, or was it like 2 streams? Anyway, I spent a lot of time streaming doing these. And there, with a very casual little thing there, I managed to complete this, this race. I can hit reset to try it again, go for a faster time. Here, doing this with the boost. And the reason I'm doing this one... Oh, hold on. That one wasn't too good. I can click the X in the top right to reset at any point as well. That one wasn't too good. I'm doing this one because this was one of the ones that I had most fun with on my first time through, because there was lots of quick little movement. So we can dive and boost, and this time we're going to go a lot faster. So there, we missed it. So let's go. It's so much harder to play these while you're talking. So let's try again. So we'll rise. We'll go with the boost. We'll turbo boost it this time. We'll raise just a little bit. We'll duck down again. Oh, we hit our head on the roof there. You notice how much more dexterity there is here. This one, again, doesn't have the routing stuff like the supply runs do. Like, there's no, like, strategy to this. There's no, like, tactics. There are little moment-to-moment dexterity-based tactics you can make. But generally speaking, there we hit our head again, so I need to swoop a little bit lower. But generally speaking, these are very, very dex-heavy encounters, and they're really, really fun. The only problem I have with this format, and of course this was all secret as well, so I think it gets a bit of slack because it's kind of a bonus thing, really, despite being so good. The only last thing that I would say about this that I wish was a bit better is they're all really short. If these were longer, if they had more checkpoints to go through, if, again, it was a bit harder to get the golds and stuff on them, I think these could be so good, but they're so short. Just as you really start to feel like you're in the mode with them, and you feel like you're really starting to get somewhere with it, unless you're going for a top leaderboard spot, you kind of don't get to relish that enjoyment and that skill you're getting, because very quickly... you'll be done with your gold, and then you're just kind of move on. So I think that's really a bit of a shame. But these are the Griffin adventures. I really had to show these off on YouTube because people who don't know about these, because they are a secret, are seriously missing out. And I think you guys would do yourself a favor to, especially if you've already picked the Griffin up, to genuinely get in there and try these. Because they're not that hard, and they are a totally different experience to anything else we've had in Guild Wars so far. And I think not enough people appreciate it. So there you go, guys. That's my little spotlight on the adventures. Just another aspect of Path of Fire I wanted to go on the record and talk about a bit on the channel. And so, yeah, let me know what you think. Am I kind of crazy with my opinions about this, about how easy it is to get gold and stuff? Should these be fire and forget features? I'd love to hear. I'm looking forward to some of these in Living World. Living World Season 3 never had any adventures. Please, for the love of God, put some of these in Living World Season 4. That's all I'm going to say, because they would be so fun to do. And especially when a new patch comes out and everybody charges through them. And if they give you special map currencies for completing, maybe that's just the kick that they need for more replayability. It should be super interesting. So there you go, guys. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And I'll see you next time.